Good evening and thank you for joining us for Alaska weather. I'm meteorologist Amanda Bowen. As always, if you need a forecast outside of our show, you can get it in one of two ways from us. First is the forecast recording line, available 24 hours a day at 1-800-472-0391. The other is if you have internet access, you can visit us at weather.gov/Alaska anytime. You can also go to weather.gov/Anchorage, Fairbanks, or Juneau to get a little bit of a more personalized local update. And from any of those sites, you can type in your city or your zip code to get a point forecast for your area for the next 7 days. And as always, if you have any feedback or comments for us, feel free to email us anytime at nws.ar.tvweather@noaa.gov. We don't have any hazards that we're expecting for the next 24 hours, so we'll skip right ahead to the satellite imagery for today. We can see a weak low pressure system circulating in that counterclockwise motion in the western Aleutians. We also have clouds associated with moisture streaming up into the Alaska Peninsula from the south. We have clouds also over the Panhandle area associated with a front moving in there. And then finally some moisture over the Chukchi Sea, that is with a boundary moving moisture into that area. We can start to see a little bit of clouds popping up over the eastern interior. That's going to be where we're focusing our showers for this afternoon. So speaking of which, let's take a look at today's surface chart. We do expect some thunderstorms to pop up this afternoon and this evening over the eastern interior, as well as over the Kenai Peninsula. So if you're in those areas today, keep an eye on the sky, and remember, if you can hear thunder, you're close enough to be struck by lightning. That's why we say when thunder roars, it's a good time to head indoors. Elsewhere across the state, looking for showers from south central eastward all the way down through the Panhandle, and rain moving into the Alaska Peninsula today. We may also see some rain mixed with fog over the Chukchi Sea coast today, with that boundary over that area moving the moisture into the area. High pressure though in command over the west coast, so a dry day from the Yukon Delta up through the Seward Peninsula and points inland to the central part of the state. Taking a look at tonight's weather, we'll have showers continuing for the southeastern portion of the state and stretching down through the Alaska Panhandle, but dry for most of the state tonight with that high pressure over the west coast. Fog, though, developing along the west coast as well as all the way up the Yukon River flats. So if you are in the central portion of the state, you may see some fog tonight or tomorrow morning. Make sure if you're out driving to use your low beams and keep a little bit of extra space between you and the car in front of you. In the Aleutians, we've got low pressure bringing rain, and we'll have some fog as well, especially behind that low pressure system, where we'll be dry in the western Aleutians, but some fog tonight into tomorrow morning. For Thursday, looking at a slight chance of thunderstorms once again over the eastern interior, relegated more close to the Canadian border though for Thursday afternoon. Showers continuing for the southeastern interior down through the Panhandle, and we'll still have some lingering rain for the southern Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians. Also some rain mixed in with fog for the northeastern North Slope area. Fog continuing possibly through the day on the west coast with that very little wind around with high pressure in command. For Friday, dry for most of the state actually. Some stray showers for the eastern Brooks Range and possibly southeastern portions of the interior, and some rain starting to move into the southern Panhandle, but dry from the eastern Aleutians all the way up the west coast and most of the North Slope, as well as pretty much the whole Yukon River area. Dry conditions on Friday with that high pressure in command and strengthening as well as spreading north on Friday. Looking at temperatures for Thursday morning, generally from the Panhandle through South Central and up into the interior and the YK Delta, temperatures upper 40s to around 50 degrees across the board. As we head north to the north slope, temperatures as always a little bit cooler, so upper 30s to low to mid 40s, and looks like mid 40s for the Aleutians on Thursday morning. Thursday afternoon, a little bit warmer than what we're seeing today, so temperatures peaking around 70 degrees in a number of locations across the interior, as well as a little bit warmer on the north slope, with a couple of temperatures even possibly reaching around 60 degrees for the north slope. Still cool and mild for the Panhandle on Thursday afternoon, temperatures in the upper 50s to around 60 degrees. Friday morning, a very similar story to what we're expecting for Thursday morning. Temperatures still in the upper 40s to around 50 degrees. Maybe a little bit warmer on Friday morning over the north slope than what we're expecting for Thursday morning, with temperatures in the low 40s to even some mid or upper 40s for Friday morning. And Friday afternoon, we'll see that warming trend continue. So 70s, around 70 to the low 70s, could even see a couple of mid 70s be eked out across the interior of the state. Also warming across the north slope, temperatures reaching the low 60s in a number of places, especially in that low terrain just on the north slope of the Brooks Range. We'll take a look at the climate outlook. This is for days 6 through 10, so most of next week is the time frame we're looking at for this. Now, it's not looking at exact numbers with temperatures, but we are looking at weather conditions are looking like they're going to be favorable for above usual temperatures, below usual temperatures, or around usual temperatures. And as we can see with all the warm colors that we see on this map here, that for most of the state, conditions are going to be favorable for warmer than usual temperatures. So if you're liking the warmer weather and that warm trend that we're talking about for the next couple of days, you are in luck, because it looks like that trend may just continue through much of next week. Now, the exception to this is looking like it's going to be the Panhandle, where we see a gray color over the map, which is indicating that it's more likely to be around usual temperatures than it is to be above or below usual temperatures. So continuing mild temperatures is what it's looking like for the Panhandle next week. Similarly, we can look at the trends for precipitation. Now, these brown and orange colors are indicating likelihoods for lower than usual rain chances, or lower than usual amounts of rain in this period next week. But again, the exception is looking like it's going to be the Panhandle, which is actually favoring increased amounts of rain for the next week time frame. So what we're looking at for next week is a likelihood of around usual temperatures and a little bit wetter than usual for the Panhandle, and the opposite for the mainland, with likelihoods for warmer than usual temperatures and drier than usual conditions.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to aviation weather, looking at flying weather for Thursday morning, we see mostly VFR conditions across the mainland as well as much of the peninsula. Some IFR conditions over the eastern Alaska Range down through the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains and down through the northern Panhandle. Also MVFR conditions across much of the North Slope and the Chukchi Sea coast, as well as the immediate portions of the west coast out through about St. Lawrence Island. IFR conditions for much of the Aleutians, and MVFR conditions for the southern Alaska Peninsula. For Thursday afternoon, we actually have some deteriorating conditions along the North Slope to IFR, as well as along the South Central and North Gulf areas to MVFR, from the eastern Kenai Peninsula through Prince William Sound and east to about Yakutat. IFR conditions remain in the eastern Aleutians as well as the western Aleutians, with MVFR through most of the rest of the Bering Sea. For Friday morning, MVFR conditions still hanging around for that northern Gulf area, and IFR conditions developing over the southern Panhandle as well as portions of the northern Gulf out over the water. IFR conditions also for the eastern North Slope area and the immediate west coast, including the western tip of Seward Peninsula, west out through St. Lawrence Island and into the Bering. Significant area of MVFR conditions from the southern Alaska Peninsula through much of the Aleutians, and then deteriorating to IFR headed further west into the western Aleutians on Friday morning. Friday afternoon, we do see improvement over the southern portion of the interior, with the exception of the highest portion of the Wrangell-St. Elias Mountains, where we'll still see MVFR conditions Friday afternoon. For the Panhandle, VFR for the northern portions of the Panhandle, MVFR for the southern portion, with some IFR conditions still hanging around for the southernmost Panhandle as well as the higher terrain of the southern Panhandle. IFR conditions still for the northern Bering Sea out through St. Lawrence Island and down almost all the way to the Aleutians, as well as for the western Aleutians themselves. Pass conditions on Thursday, AKwx Pass as well as Adigan Pass looking at VFR on Thursday. Lake Clark and Merrill Pass is also VFR on Thursday. Rainy Pass VFR as well as Windy Pass VFR on Thursday. MVFR in the morning at Isabel Pass improving to VFR, but we do expect a chance of afternoon thunderstorms Thursday afternoon at Isabel Pass. MVFR through the day at Mentasta Pass on Thursday. Also a slight chance of thunderstorms at Mentasta Pass Thursday afternoon. Tanita Pass VFR through the day, but that slight chance of thunderstorms also showing up there for Thursday afternoon. And Portage Pass VFR, but actually deteriorating to MVFR Thursday afternoon with a chance of thunderstorms. Chilkoot and White Passes both expected to be MVFR Thursday morning, improving to VFR Thursday afternoon. Freezing levels, we have still our low pressure in the Aleutians that's bringing our lowest freezing levels down to about 6,000 feet over the eastern Aleutians. Also an area about 6,000 foot freezing levels over the northern Panhandle. But our warmer air coming in with high pressure from the south near the west coast of Canada, so up to about 14,000 feet as we get out to off the British Columbia coast. Icing on Thursday, one area mainly over the eastern Aleutians above about 9,000 feet of isolated moderate icing, and then a very small area impacting the northeasternmost corner of the state above 10,000 feet isolated moderate icing on Thursday. Jet stream winds, we have our jet is running kind of through the Aleutians and then up through the northern Gulf and across the Panhandle. So peak winds in the jet stream about 110 knots out of the west over the northern Gulf, just off the coast of the Panhandle, decreasing to about 100 knots just east of the Panhandle, about 90 knots on the west side of that peak jet max. Also about 100 knots just south of the eastern Aleutians, about 90 to 95 knots out of the west coming into there. For Thursday, 9,000 foot winds. Our peak winds are still in the Gulf, but further south, so more in the southern Gulf, anywhere from 50 to about 70 knots out of the southwest and west there. Low pressure in the Aleutians, but not as much wind on around that, 35 knots out of the east on the north side and 35 knots out of the west on the south side of that low. 3,000 foot winds, same story, 40 to 60 knots over the southern Gulf, but pretty light winds elsewhere. And no turbulence on Thursday. Stay tuned for more Alaska weather after this.
Technology. It's the rhythm of our everyday life. We're more dependent on satellite and communication systems than at any other time in history. Disruptions can affect our economy and even our safety. To prepare for the effects of such events and minimize impacts, we need to look outside our atmosphere, some 93 million miles away, at a star we call the Sun. It's our main energy source. It warms the Earth and grows our food. While the Sun and the space between may seem pleasant from our perspective, it's anything but peaceful. At its surface exists a chaotic state of eruptions and radiation. And unlike Vegas, what happens at the Sun doesn't stay at the Sun.
Space weather is essentially emissions from the sun, radiation, magnetic field that erupts from the solar surface, pumped out into space, sometimes right towards Earth. When it impacts the Earth, it impacts our technology. That's what we call space weather.
These solar events and their effects at Earth can disrupt systems we take for granted. From causing blackouts to the power grid, to delaying offshore drilling operations due to inaccurate GPS data. Interference with communication systems can force air traffic to reroute and impact rescue response and coordination. Outside our atmosphere, solar radiation can harm astronauts and the systems they depend on. The good news is that these eruptions can be detected early. Forecasters at the NOAA Space Weather Prediction Center in Boulder, Colorado, have their eyes on the sun at all times.
The Space Weather Prediction Center is part of the National Weather Service and is very much like a normal weather forecast office. We're here 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We're looking at data, we're looking at imagery, we're looking at model outputs. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches of imminent activity to our customers so they can take action.
In many ways, forecasting space weather is a lot like forecasting hurricanes. Those who rely on space weather forecasts, like electric power grid managers, are informed early on and can begin taking protective action.
When we see an eruption on the sun, space weather forecasters will issue a watch. And this is much like a hurricane watch. When a hurricane sits offshore of Miami, for example, perhaps 48 hours out, we too can see way in advance that something may be coming towards the Earth.
As the storm moves toward us, it hits a monitoring spacecraft orbiting 1 million miles away from Earth.
It's kind of our buoy sitting out there offshore, and that hurricane about 30, 45 minutes before it makes landfall, we'll get the measurements from the buoy. That's what this spacecraft does for us. That big eruption that left the sun hits the spacecraft. Now we've got the measurements of exactly what's going to impact us here on Earth, and we issue the warnings to give the power grid a heads up that the storm is now imminent. An interesting element to this whole process is that when the forecasters issue the alert, the power grid receives the alert, takes the necessary actions to protect the grid, and the average citizen never knows anything ever happened.
The number of customers who rely on space weather information continues to grow. As our reliance on technology increases, so will our need for constant monitoring of the sun.
Space weather affects technologies. As conditions develop, we put out alerts, warnings, and watches to our customers so they can take action.
GPS has changed society. Most people don't realize how remarkable and how many different applications there are.
The GPS has become an integral part, not just of our daily lives as far as cell phones and guidance for our cars and mapping, but the whole system in agriculture is really relying heavily on high accuracy GPS.
So they're using GPS to plant those seeds with centimeter accuracy. And then they can come behind it and irrigate and fertilize right where that seed is with that 1 centimeter accuracy.
The GPS creates a line for the operator that he can steer along, or you go to another level and the operator doesn't steer anymore and the tractor has an automatic steering system on it, much like a cruise control on a car, except for when I push the button, it doesn't drive a set speed. When I push a button, it stays on a predefined line.
You don't even need lights. You can do it at nighttime. You program your GPS and it's driving that tractor for you. So it's huge, and it's changing the way that the farmers farm the fields.
6 or 7 days out.
There's an interest in GPS applications from the space weather side because when the sun is eruptive, it causes GPS to falter, and in some cases it doesn't work at all.
Productivity may suffer to a certain degree in that there's no way that I as a human being can steer as good 8 hours a day as a GPS system is going to do. It's going to be the same all day long. Some of the other application technologies, those are going to be gone. We're not going to have the ability to do good section control on sprayers and planters and fertilizer applicators without GPS.
We see a huge growing customer base in so many different industries, so many different sectors now relying on GPS and high precision GPS. They're all big customers for us.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for a look at your marine forecast. Starting out with the sea ice edge, we see not much in the way of change in the map from yesterday. Still some chunks of ice right along the north slope, but in general, no ice attached to the coast across the state and open area between the Chukchi Sea and the Beaufort Sea. We do still expect to see light southerly winds over the next few days, so we expect that to continue to slowly melt the ice edge further north over the coming days. The marine forecast for southeast on Thursday, looking at relatively light winds, 10 to 15 knots, as well as small seas, just 4 to 5 feet over the Gulf and 2 to 3 feet for the inside waterways on Thursday. Taking a look into Friday, we've got winds picking up a bit out of the east over most of the Gulf, but we do have some southerly flow over the far southern portions of the Gulf. 15 to 25 knots over the Gulf and 15 to 20 knots over the inside waterways. Along with those winds, those seas will be coming up just a little bit to 4 to 8 feet over the Gulf and 3 to 4 feet for the inside waterways. For Thursday across South Central, another light wind day, about 10 knots across the board, and small seas to go along with that, just 2 to 4 feet. As we look ahead into Friday, not a whole lot of change. Winds and seas coming up ever so slightly, with some winds at 15 knots and seas up to about 5 feet. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island area, for Thursday, winds 10 to 20 knots with strongest winds over the Gulf side out of the east at about 20 knots. Seas 5 feet on the Gulf side and just 1 to 3 feet on the Bering Sea side for Thursday. Looking ahead into Friday, we do see some significant changes, particularly on the Gulf side of the peninsula, looking at 20 to 35 knot winds out of the northeast. And seas picking up along with those winds anywhere from 5 feet to about 11 feet. So seas and winds increasing significantly over the Gulf on Friday. On the Bering Sea side, not as much change though, as we see 10 to 15 knot winds on Friday with 2 to 3 foot seas. For the Aleutians on Thursday, another relatively light wind day across most of the Aleutians with 10 to 15 knots of wind. We do see some increasing winds in the western Aleutians though, about 25 knots out of the southeast. Seas relatively small across the board, 2 to 4 feet, 4 to 5 feet for the Gulf side. For Friday, we do see an increase in winds and seas, especially for the western Aleutians, as we have low pressure moving into the area. So we'll see winds out of the east and southeast for the western Aleutians 30 to 35 knots, and seas increasing to about 7 to 12 feet. For the central and eastern Aleutians, though, still 10 to 15 knot winds and still seas 2 to 3 feet on the north side and 4 to 5 feet on the south side of the island chain. For the west coast on Thursday, 5 knot winds up north in Norton Sound out of the northwest, but we have some northeasterly flow for much of the rest of the west coast and Bering Sea at about 10 to 15 knots. Small seas just 1 foot in Norton Sound and 2 to 3 feet for the Bering Sea on Thursday. We do see some increases across the board on Friday, with most significantly in Norton Sound, where winds pick up to about 15 knots out of the northwest, with north and westerly flow for the Bering Sea anywhere from 10 to 20 knots. Seas picking up just a little bit, ranging from about 2 to 5 feet on Friday. For the Arctic coast on Thursday, for the North Slope, we've got generally southerly winds 5 to 15 knots. Strongest winds for this area are going to be in the Chukchi Sea, anywhere from 15 to about 25 knots out of the south and southwest. And then as we look ahead into Friday, those winds are actually coming down a little bit in the Chukchi Sea to about 15 to 20 knots out of the southwest. Seas about 1 foot along the North Slope and 4 to 5 feet in the Chukchi Sea. Recapping our weather for tonight, we've got showers continuing for the southeastern interior down through the Panhandle, but mostly dry conditions across the mainland with fog development thanks to high pressure in control. We do have low pressure moving into the Aleutians though, bringing rain to the eastern Aleutians and Alaska Peninsula. Thanks so much for watching Alaska TV Weather.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.